Today, we're going to be speaking with Edward Miller, who's a professor at Northeastern University, also author of the book A Conspiratorial Life, Robert Welch, the John Birch Society, and the Revolution of American Conservatism. Really appreciate your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's a great opportunity to discuss the book and to talk with you.
Yeah, so to start with, we've been thinking a lot about this line in conservatism that got us to where we are today, and we could sort of start that story at a lot of different points in time. I think an interesting place to start might be if we go back to Robert Welch and the John Birch Society to start kind of creating our understanding of how things got to be the way they are. Who was Robert Welch, and talk about his relevance to modern day conservatism a little bit.
Well, Robert Welch was a candy manufacturer from the South. He was originally from North Carolina, and he was a very successful candy manufacturer. He created such childhood favorites as the Sugar Daddy and the Junior Mints, and he decided his career was done for making money, and then he decided to get involved in anti-communist activity and establish an organization called the John Birch Society. This organization tended to be of a conspiratorial bent, with the major highlight being that Welch believed that President Eisenhower was a communist, which of course is ridiculous. But he continued to establish this John Birch Society, and it became the most powerful anti-communist organization in the early 1960s, late 1950s, and as I argue in the book, had influence even into the 70s during the age of Reagan, of which we're probably still in.
And when we think about the McCarthy era and sort of that reactionary, fear-mongering basis on which, we need to be suspicious of people with certain ideologies, and we need hearings, et cetera. That paradigm in different forms has really persisted throughout the 20th century and into the 21st among the American right wing, has it not?
Oh, absolutely. The claims of treason that were echoed by McCarthy, that were echoed by William Jenner. He was another senator, that were echoed by William Noland. These kind of aspersions continue on into the Republican Party in the present.
It didn't have to go this way, in the sense that, I think an interesting anecdote is William F. Buckley, who we don't have to be fans of his or praise him or anything to recognize that Buckley's instincts were very much antithetical to the idea of Welch, I think, in my understanding, and this kind of Red Scare type stuff, where Buckley seemed to think that the right was going to do better by taking a sort of less reactionary approach. Is that accurate? And why? Did that succeed for a period of time until it again reversed, or what's the history of that?
I think it succeeded for a brief period of time, but Buckley was an excellent orator and historian. He was a gatekeeper of the far right, and he was also, this was his pet project, to create the conservative movement of the 20th century. And he saw a threat to the conspiratorial behavior in the John Birch Society, and he concluded that it was best that Robert Welch leave the organization or be settled, as he said, into the editorial room where he could do less damage. And for a long time, historians thought that Buckley had excommunicated Welch, but I began to take a look at what was going on and what the John Birch Society had done. after the period that they were traditionally known as being in exile, the period 66 to 68. But I found in my research that Welch changed the organization, focused on ad hoc issues through ad hoc committees, and pushed issues that became consonant with the Reagan Revolution. Issues such as abortion, issues such as the Equal Rights Amendment, anti-taxation issues. These all became part of the fabric of the Reagan Revolution, and pushed the Reagan Revolution in that particular direction in the 1970s. So I found that Welch was more significant than we thought.
It seems to me that had the sort of Buckley wing won out, you would not have seen maybe the Tea Party, the Trump wave, QAnon, even a lot of the kind of modern outcroppings of this, the anti-vax. I mean, I guess we can't say for sure, but it seems that those movements follow much more from the conspiratorial Welch side than from maybe what Buckley wanted.
Well, it's of course we historically it's a tough
yes,
it's a tough we can't determine with exactitude that would happen. Conspiratorial thinking has become more popular in our culture ever since Watergate and the 1970s, when the Church Committee came out, as when the Iran-Contra affair occurred in the 1980s, when you had figures like Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh in the 1990s pushing their views. But I think it's true that if it was just Buckley and Welch was not part of the scene, it probably would have been a lot different.
I'm curious to what degree the realities of media and the development of the internet had as a role in all this. There's this book, Waves of Rancor, which is sort of a look at, the history of how did talk radio and AM radio become right wing, and the connection between churches and like low power religious radio. There are a lot of this nitty gritty stuff, but it seems to me that the more conspiratorial Welch type thinking lent itself much better to the radio space and media space than maybe what Buckley was more known for. And I wonder to what degree the realities of media influence the direction of the American right.
Oh, I think without a doubt, the influence of talk radio, especially after the end of the Fairness Doctrine, you definitely see an increase in conspiratorial thinking. If you take a look at how Rush Limbaugh phrases conspiratorial thinking on his show, he would just allude to something in the facts, and say, well, this is what I read in the facts, to avoid libel or something like that. But he did imply this conspiratorial thinking very, very casually, along with Michael Savage and other conservative radio hosts who had adopted that tradition. Glenn Beck. So these figures are important as well. I'm not diminishing their role, but before all this comes Robert Welch, who is setting up this way of thinking, this different way of thinking, and he is joined by other radio folks like Dan Smoot, who is a Dallas-based former FBI G-man who worked for H.L. Hunt, who comes to his own conclusion and concludes that it was not a communist conspiracy per se that was driving things, but a globalist conspiracy.
Yes,
Which is part of the part of the language that you see in Stephen Bannon's politics today. Speaking of not of a conspiracy of communism, but of globalists and internationalists, and Welch was speaking that language by the end of his life as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm do. Is it fair to say that right now the American right is as conspiratorial as it's ever been, as indicated by, I mean, recent polls of Republicans, more than half believe Trump is actually the winner of the 2020 election. The degree to which they question whether vaccines work, whether COVID is real, or however we define, is there any time at which the bulk of the Republican Party believed things like this?
I can't in my knowledge of all the time in the 1980s and the 1970s and the 60s. I think the early 60s there was a significant belief in that particular direction. But I think that the combination of the pandemic and the Trump's refusal to admit the reality that he lost the presidential election, and his willingness to tout this to his base, continue to tout it to his base, has had a significant impact. So,
what can reverse the course of a movement that is so committed to that type of thinking? I mean, I think, to some degree, if they start losing, they would probably be forced into rethinking it, I guess. But I mean, what sort of forces can really turn around a movement like that?
Well, I always, but I always, this is a great question, and I always consider this myself when, I'm encountered with somebody who has a different perspective from how I look at, how I would look at something that I would see as not nefarious. I would just see it as the mistakes of individuals, or let's take the loss of China in the 1950s. After 1949, many Republicans were blaming the Democrats for the loss of China, and they were focusing on the treason of elected officials, Dean Acheson and George Marshall, even Harry Truman, and they were pinpointing, Welch included, were pinpointing that Truman was a traitor, or at least Acheson and Marshall were traitors in this process. I'm more apt to see individual mistakes and the fact that the Chinese people had decided on Chiang Kai-shek in that particular case. So I look at it as an opportunity each time to talk to people on a personal level and try to speak to them about the history of it. And if that doesn't work,
Right. I mean, I think the question that a lot of people are kind of grappling with in looking at the direction of the Republican Party over the last 6 years in particular, and then even just a little bit longer, is sort of like, what's the kind of end game here? And part of it may be that this is just an indefinite means. Like there's not necessarily an end, in the sense of, earlier in the week we looked on the show at a clip of Glenn Beck recently interviewing James Lindsay, where they are talking in extreme, like it's almost like a modern Red Scare type language about, they're going to put us, if we're not in cages, we have to be ready to resist. And it's just like, it could be applied to anything. It's like, are you talking about vaccines or Democrats or China, or like what? It almost is just this universal language that's not super clear, but you're supposed to be very scared about it. And it seems almost like it's just a means to its own self-preservation rather than to some end.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I listen to a lot of the far right shows because it's part of my job. And if you hear some of the things coming out of Mike Lindell of the Pillow Guy, for instance, he's still trying to overturn the ballots. And
I've interviewed him, and I'll tell you, he seems to be a true believer. I mean, in my conversation with him off air, he seems to really believe this stuff.
Oh, okay. So you've talked with him on air.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating.
It was.
I would, yes, I would put him down as a true believer, and I would put Robert Welch down as a true believer. I have no, after reading this book, I have no sense that this was done for histrionics. He wasn't doing this to earn money. He gave every cent of his millions to fight windmills in a sense. He was the Don Quixote of the conservative movement. And but there are still folks who are committed to this canard that we see as a canard, but how to deal with that? I think we're all wrestling with that.
Yeah. It remains an open question for sure. The book is A Conspiratorial Life, Robert Welch, the John Birch Society, and the Revolution of American Conservatism. We've been speaking with the book's author, Northeastern University Professor Edward Miller. Really appreciate your insights today.
Oh, it was a great pleasure. I very much enjoyed it.